February 6, 1944, dawned bitterly cold over the Ardennes forest. Snow lay thick on the ground, turning the earth into a white battlefield. In a small German outpost, nestled among frost-laden trees and shallow trenches, soldiers stirred under heavy blankets, rubbing frost-bitten hands and sharpening their weapons. It was supposed to be a quiet morning, the kind where soldiers count the hours until the next patrol, until the next ration. Captain Franz Mayer, a young but experienced officer, walked among his men, inspecting the defenses. His breath rose in pale clouds against the gray morning. The camp was modest, a scattering of tents, a few supply crates, and a trench line that offered minimal protection. Mayer knew the Americans were active in the region. Scouting parties had been reported, but he did not expect an immediate attack. At 0630 hours, the quiet shattered. The distant thump of artillery rolled through the forest like a living thing. First one shell, then another, then a cascade. Explosions ripped through the tents, sending wooden stakes, splintered crates, and frozen earth into the air. The Germans shouted, scrambling for cover. Snow and debris filled the air. The cold became a burning sting on exposed skin. Mayer dove into a shallow trench as another shell slammed near the command tent, tossing men like ragdolls. The noise was deafening: screams, rifle fire, the metallic ping of bullets striking steel. The Americans had arrived in force, timing their assault for maximum devastation. The first wave of American soldiers stormed the camp, rifles spitting death, throwing grenades into trenches and tents. German defenders fired back, but chaos ruled. Smoke, snow, and the flash of explosions obscured everything. Men fell screaming, some clawing at the snow, others thrown against tree trunks by the force of artillery. Mayer's heart pounded as he observed the carnage. His men were dropping fast. Lieutenant Kruger was hit by shrapnel, Sergeant Hoffman's body disappeared under a collapsing supply crate, and dozens more fell to rifle fire. It was a slaughter. Mayer grabbed a fallen rifle, firing controlled bursts from the trench, his eyes scanning for American movements, calculating, prioritizing. Within minutes the camp was nearly destroyed. Smoke rose in black columns from smoldering tents, while fires burned through wooden supply crates. The few Germans who remained conscious tried to fight, but the American onslaught was merciless. Mayer took cover behind a half-destroyed wall, firing at approaching soldiers, dropping two before slipping into the snow. A grenade exploded near his trench, throwing him to the ground, but he survived, just. When the first shelling ended and the Americans regrouped for the second wave, Mayer made a grim assessment. The camp was in ruins, most of his men were dead or dying, and only he remained able to move. Pain from a wound in his side throbbed sharply, but he forced himself to ignore it. Survival required control, not panic. As the Americans swept through the wreckage, Mayer vanished into the tree-line. He moved low, using fallen trees, snowdrifts, and shadow to mask his presence. Every American soldier in the camp either engaged with the remaining German resistance, or fell victim to the earlier barrage. The outpost that had been lively only an hour before was now a field of ice, smoke, and bodies. Mayer paused behind a dense thicket, surveying the destruction. His uniform was torn, frozen blood staining the white snow. He counted at least 50 dead Americans scattered through the camp and surrounding woods. The few who were alive were moving erratically, trying to gather themselves, but the chaos had slowed their advance. Mayer's dark eyes scanned the camp and then the surrounding forest. He knew what had to be done. The Americans believed they had won. They believed the German threat had been neutralized. But Mayer had survived when no one expected it. He had survived by being patient, by being disciplined, by reading the battlefield. And now, he would turn the Americans' overconfidence against them. Slowly, deliberately, he moved from the tree-line back toward the camp's edge, collecting weapons from fallen soldiers, testing grenades, and retrieving ammunition. Every step was calculated. Every sound he made was controlled. He was no longer simply a survivor, he was the predator in a forest of unsuspecting prey. The snow continued to fall, silent except for the crackle of distant gunfire and the moans of the wounded. Mayer adjusted the strap of a stolen submachine gun over his shoulder and tucked a grenade into his coat. His face was calm, expressionless, but his mind raced through the next moves. By noon, the German outpost was a graveyard. Mayer alone remained, and he had no intention of leaving the Americans alive to claim victory. From the shadows, he would begin the hunt. Each soldier who thought the attack had succeeded would learn, too late, that death could walk silently among them. Captain Franz Mayer, wounded, cold, and bloodied, vanished into the white forest, preparing to turn the tide of the day with skill, ruthlessness, and the quiet precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. The morning sun barely pierced the gray haze over the Ardennes. Snowflakes fell in lazy spirals, covering broken bodies and smoking tents alike. The American assault had ended, or so the survivors believed. In reality, the forest held one more deadly shadow. Captain Franz Mayer, wounded but alert, crouched in a drift of snow just beyond the ruined German camp. His breathing was steady. Every muscle in his body ached from shrapnel and the impact of falling debris, yet he moved with the precise control of a seasoned soldier. Mayer assessed the battlefield. The Americans were regrouping near the wreckage of the tents, their rifles clattering as they checked magazines, shouting instructions to each other. Fear was etched into their faces, but they were still alive, still thinking the danger had passed. He counted them quietly, 12, maybe 15, scattered and separated by the twisted wreckage of their own artillery shells. Each of them was a potential target. Mayer's hand gripped the stolen submachine gun tighter. The snow muffled the crunch of his boots as he moved toward the nearest tree line, using the treacherous terrain to stay hidden. The first American had bent down to inspect a fallen crate. Mayer's finger hovered on the trigger, watching. Patience was his weapon now. He waited until the soldier's attention was elsewhere, then raised the submachine gun, firing a short, controlled burst. The soldier didn't scream. He never had a chance. The others barely had time to notice before Mayer melted back into the snow and shadows, disappearing from sight. Chaos erupted again. The remaining Americans scattered, calling out, firing blindly in all directions. They didn't know where the shots had come from. Mayer used the confusion to his advantage, moving silently from shadow to shadow, keeping low, slipping between snow-covered debris and fallen branches. His wound burned, but adrenaline kept him focused. Every sense was on high alert. He approached a supply crate, carefully avoiding a pair of Americans attempting to set up a defensive position. One of them shouted, spotting movement in the snow, but Mayer was already behind them, firing a burst at close range. The man collapsed, eyes wide in shock, before he hit the snow. The other fired wildly, but Mayer rolled to the side, returning fire and taking him down. By mid-morning, the battlefield had shifted. The Americans no longer had the advantage of surprise. They were being hunted. Mayer's mind worked quickly, planning each move with tactical precision. He used the wreckage of tents and fallen timber to set up traps. A tripwire here, a grenade placed behind a crate there, small measures that would kill or slow anyone who stumbled into them. Mayer paused to reload, snow melting into his blood-soaked coat. His eyes scanned the distant tree line. From there, he could see more Americans moving cautiously, trying to flank him. They didn't know that the real threat was already inside their perimeter. He adjusted his grip, took aim, and let the submachine gun speak. Another soldier went down before his comrades could react. The forest around the camp seemed to grow quieter with each passing minute. The surviving Americans were spread thin, their nerves frayed, their morale crumbling. Mayer moved like a shadow through the wreckage, striking where they least expected. He had no plan to retreat. There was no one left to retreat for. The battlefield was his now, and he would claim it with cold, calculated efficiency. One small group of Americans had taken cover behind a destroyed trench. Mayer approached carefully, counting each man, noting the angles of fire. He lobbed a grenade into the center of their cover, retreating into snowdrifts before it exploded. Screams echoed through the trees as snow and dirt flew, and when he returned to the scene, 2 more were down, the last trying to crawl away. Mayer didn't hesitate. He finished the survivor quickly. Hours passed. Mayer moved like a phantom through the wrecked camp, using the broken tents and felled timber to his advantage. He was patient, methodical, killing silently, vanishing, and reappearing without warning. The Americans had no idea how many had fallen or where Mayer would strike next. Every time they thought they were safe, a shot rang out, a body collapsed into the snow, and fear spread like wildfire. By late afternoon, only a handful of Americans remained. They were exhausted, trembling, desperate. Mayer had used every advantage: terrain, snow, darkness, and the remnants of his fallen comrades' equipment, to pick them off one by one. He moved with the discipline of a ghost, leaving no trace of his path except for the bodies strewn across the battlefield. Finally, Mayer paused atop a ridge, surveying the devastation. The camp was silent now, the smoke from fires curling into the sky. Snowflakes drifted onto the frozen bodies, covering them in white, as if nature itself were trying to erase the carnage. Mayer's eyes were cold and calculating. He knew the remaining Americans were scared, disoriented, and easy prey. The hunt was far from over. With a silent breath, Mayer melted back into the shadows of the forest, moving around the periphery of the camp, setting up the next ambush. The Americans would think the worst was over, but Mayer had only just begun. He was no longer a soldier fleeing death. He was a predator, methodical and unstoppable, and every surviving American would learn too late that one man could undo the power of an entire assault. Twilight fell over the Ardennes, casting long gray shadows over the devastated American camp. Snow had begun to melt in places where fires burned, leaving the ground slick with ice, mud, and blood. The once pristine forest now smelled of smoke, cordite, and death. Mayer moved like a phantom through the wreckage, the faint hiss of wind in the trees masking the soft crunch of his boots. He had learned the patrol patterns during the chaos of the assault. American soldiers, exhausted and shaken, now believed the immediate threat had passed. Some were crawling among the wreckage, checking radios, trying to organize medics for the wounded. Mayer's eyes narrowed. Each movement, each sound, was an opportunity. Using the shadows, he circled the camp. Fallen timber, overturned crates, and collapsed tents became his allies. He paused behind a shattered wall, observing 3 Americans moving toward a smoking supply tent. Mayer's hand tightened on a grenade. Timing was everything. With a soft toss, the grenade landed amid the group, and he dove behind cover just as it detonated. The blast threw 2 men violently into the snow, blood splattering, the third screaming as his leg was shattered. Mayer waited, listening to silence, then emerged to finish the wounded man swiftly. He moved methodically. Every American who survived the initial artillery and his earlier attacks now faced a predator whose knowledge of the terrain, patience, and ruthlessness was absolute. Mayer was careful, never exposing himself unnecessarily. He scouted from high ground, sliding down snow-covered slopes to take advantage of cover. The cold had numbed his pain, and adrenaline kept his senses razor-sharp. Inside the remnants of the command tent, a small group of Americans huddled. They believed barricades and their few working rifles could stop anyone. Mayer observed them from the shadows, noting their lack of discipline and fear-soaked faces. One tried to peek out a tent flap, scanning the tree-ling. Mayer's breath was slow, controlled. He raised a submachine gun and fired 2 controlled bursts, taking the soldier down silently. The others froze, panic-stricken, as Mayer slipped unseen into the wreckage. Mayer used the camp's remnants to set traps, taking advantage of American overconfidence. A tripwire here, a loosely stacked crate there, a hidden grenade behind frozen debris, small devices that could kill or maim without him being seen. He learned quickly which soldiers panicked under pressure and which tried to fight intelligently, striking first at the weakest and most predictable. As night descended, the remaining Americans attempted to regroup near a partially destroyed trench. Mayer crept closer, snow clinging to his boots, rifle slung over his shoulder. He picked off 2 men before they could react, using the faint glow of flares to aim. The others scattered, calling out orders in fear and confusion. Every shout, every frantic step, led them closer to Mayer's next trap. He moved like a ghost through the camp, silent except for the occasional muffled footstep. Mayer's mind catalogued every movement, every hiding place, every likely route the survivors might take. In the shadows, he was everywhere and nowhere. When a soldier attempted to escape into the forest, Mayer fired, bringing him down before he reached cover. Hours passed. Mayer's hunt became surgical. He avoided unnecessary noise, relying on patience and calculated bursts of violence. A single American soldier tried to set a flare to illuminate the area, revealing himself in a moment of fear. Mayer didn't hesitate. The man never fired. He crumpled silently, snow cushioning his fall. By midnight, only 4 Americans remained alive. Exhaustion and fear slowed them. Mayer used this to his advantage, setting a small ambush in a collapsed trench near the edge of the camp. One soldier, desperate and trembling, entered the trench first. Mayer fired a controlled burst from concealment, the man collapsing into the frozen mud. Another screamed in panic, trying to rescue him, and Mayer struck him with a second shot, then a quick sweep of the submachine gun finished him. The last soldier stood alone, rifle shaking in his hands. Mayer emerged from the shadows, gun leveled, expressionless. The man fired once, wildly, and missed. Mayer advanced steadily, closing the distance. Hand-to-hand combat was inevitable. The soldier lunged with a bayonet. Mayer sidestepped, grabbed the weapon, and twisted, ending the struggle in seconds. The snow around them was untouched now by any other movement. Silence returned. Captain Mayer surveyed the battlefield. The American camp was a ruin, tents burned, trenches collapsed, fires smoldering, and snow littered with the bodies of men who had once thought themselves safe. Mayer's breath rose in clouds in the cold night air. He was alone. Every surviving soldier had been eliminated, every threat neutralized. Yet he did not linger. Survival had been his first objective, but domination was his goal. Moving into the treeline, he vanished into the darkness, leaving the camp as a ghostly testament to his precision and ruthlessness. By the end of Part 3, Mayer was no longer just a survivor. He was a shadow of death, a solitary hunter whose presence in the Ardennes would haunt the memories of any who might have escaped. The Ardennes night pressed cold and unyielding against the ruins of the American camp. Snow had hardened into icy crusts where fire had melted it, and the occasional moan of a wounded soldier echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the trees. Captain Franz Mayer moved through the shadows with the precision of a hunter, every sense alert. He had eliminated the majority of Americans during the day, but a handful remained, terrified, scattered, and unaware that death had become a stalking presence. Mayer paused behind a broken tree trunk, observing 2 soldiers attempting to regroup near the edge of the camp. Their rifles trembled in unison. Panic had replaced any coherent thought. He could see their breaths in the frigid air, white and ragged, their eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Fear made them predictable. Fear made them vulnerable. Silently, Mayer set a small tripwire between 2 pieces of debris, attaching a grenade to it. He stepped back into the darkness and waited. Minutes passed. The soldiers advanced cautiously, calling to each other. One triggered the wire. The grenade detonated with a muffled blast, snow and ice flying into the air. Mayer was already moving, shooting quickly and silently, dispatching the soldier as he tried to crawl away. The other screamed in terror and fled deeper into the forest, unknowingly heading straight toward another trap. The forest seemed alive with tension. Every crack of a branch, every snap of ice underfoot, could betray a position, or signal imminent death. Mayer exploited the terrain masterfully. Using the ruined tents, overturned crates, and shadows cast by flickering fires, he struck where the survivors least expected. Each shot was precise, each movement deliberate. He had no plan to retreat, he had only the hunt. One soldier stumbled across a half-buried log, triggering another hidden grenade. Mayer fired from concealment, ending the man before he could recover. Silence fell again, broken only by the occasional groan from a wounded soldier hidden under snow. Mayer paused to reload, his eyes scanning the tree-line, calculating the next ambush. The remaining Americans were now fully aware that they were being hunted. Their movements became erratic. Fear had replaced strategy. Mayer used this to his advantage, luring a group into a shallow trench. He waited, breast steady, until they clustered together. Then he emerged from the shadows, submachine gun spitting controlled bursts. 2 soldiers fell instantly. The third tried to escape, but Mayer was already behind him, finishing the job with the butt of his weapon. Psychological terror became Mayer's ally. He moved silently through the forest, leaving signs of his presence: a fallen weapon here, footprints there, the faint echo of a gunshot in the distance, without ever revealing his true location. The survivors imagined him everywhere, nowhere, their nerves fraying with every passing minute. A single soldier attempted to make contact with others, shouting into the frozen night for any remaining allies. Mayer listened, then fired a precise shot, cutting the man down instantly. The forest absorbed the scream, leaving only the cold wind and the crunch of snow under Mayer's boots. He circled the perimeter, using every advantage of cover, shadow, and silence. Occasionally, he would strike from an unexpected angle. 2 soldiers crouched behind a burned-out tent thought themselves safe until a single burst from the darkness ended them. The last few tried desperately to flee into the forest, but Mayer anticipated every move, cutting them off and eliminating them with ruthless efficiency. By midnight, only 3 Americans remained. They huddled together, trembling, their rifles raised but useless against a foe they could not see. Mayer stalked them like a shadow, testing their reactions, exploiting their terror. A faint rustle in the snow here, a sudden noise there, each calculated to provoke fear. When he finally attacked, it was swift and decisive. 2 fell before they could react. The third tried to run, but Mayer's submachine gun barked, the man crumpling into the snow. Mayer stood over him for a moment, watching the last flicker of life fade. He adjusted his coat, checked his weapons, and vanished into the darkness before any other sound could betray him. The forest returned to silence, broken only by the wind whispering through the bare branches and the soft hiss of snow settling over the blood-soaked ground. Mayer paused, surveying the ruined camp below. Fires burned low, tents were in ruins, and bodies lay scattered among the debris. The Americans had believed the assault would succeed, they had believed victory was theirs. But Mayer had rewritten the rules. He was no longer a survivor of an attack, he was the arbiter of death, the silent shadow that had walked among them and struck with unerring precision. He melted into the tree-line, leaving the American camp a desolate graveyard. Only the whispers of the Ardennes carried the story of a single German officer who had survived against impossible odds and hunted down every enemy who had thought themselves safe. The forest had grown eerily silent. Only the faint hiss of the wind and the distant crackle of smoldering fires punctuated the night. The American camp lay in ruins, burned tents, overturned crates, broken rifles, and snow stained with blood. Captain Franz Mayer moved like a shadow among the debris, his eyes cold and calculating. Only a handful of soldiers remained alive, trembling in the dark, believing that they might still survive. Mayer crouched behind a shattered wall, observing the last 3 men. They huddled near a partially destroyed trench, weapons shaking, eyes darting, hearts racing. They had tried to regroup after his relentless attacks, but fatigue, fear, and confusion had left them vulnerable. Mayer smiled faintly to himself. Victory was inevitable. He moved silently through the snow, using every advantage the ruined camp offered. Fallen timber, half-buried supply crates, and collapsed tents became both cover and tools. One of the Americans shifted, trying to find a line of sight, and Mayer fired a controlled burst from the shadows. The man's scream was cut short as he collapsed into the snow. 2 remained. Mayer advanced with deliberate precision, calculating the angles, anticipating their reactions. The next 2 men scrambled toward the tree-line, thinking that running could save them. Snow crunched underfoot, their panic audible. Mayer was already ahead, repositioning silently. As they stumbled through the wreckage, he threw a grenade into their path. The explosion threw them violently to the ground, leaving only one struggling to rise. The last soldier, a young man, barely more than a boy, stood frozen near a burnout supply crate, rifle raised but useless in his shaking hands. Mayer emerged from the shadows, submachine gun trained on him. The boy fired once, wildly, missing entirely. Mayer stepped closer, eyes cold and unflinching. He didn't panic. He never did. The soldier attempted to flee, but Mayer was faster, moving like a predator that had been hunting for hours. They collided in the snow, and Mayer engaged in hand-to-hand combat. The boy swung the rifle as a club, but Mayer dodged, twisting and knocking it from his grasp. He struck with the butt of his gun, sending the young man sprawling into the icy ground. Mayer moved with deadly precision, his movements fluid and practiced. A swift kick, a crushing grip, and the soldier was finished. Silence followed immediately. The battlefield was complete. Mayer surveyed the camp from the treeline. Fires burned low, the snow was dotted with bodies, and no American soldier remained alive. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the wind whistling through the forest. He had turned the chaos of the American assault into a controlled hunt, eliminating every threat with ruthless efficiency. Mayer's breath rose in clouds as he adjusted his coat and checked his weapons. His uniform was torn, blood-stained, and frozen in places, but he was uninjured enough to continue moving. Every trap, every ambush, every calculated shot had brought him to this point. He had survived against overwhelming odds, and now, the battlefield belonged to him. He moved slowly, deliberately, through the ruins of the camp, avoiding the smoldering fires and the debris that littered the snow. Every footstep was careful, controlled. Mayer had no intention of lingering. The battle was over. The hunt had ended. Only the Ardennes, the snow, and the ruined camp remained as witnesses to his deadly skill. By the early hours of the morning, Mayer had disappeared into the treeline. The American forces that had launched the attack would return later, finding only death and destruction. Rumors would spread of a lone German soldier who had survived an assault and hunted every man who dared to attack him. But Mayer would be gone, leaving only fear and the memory of his precision behind. The forest reclaimed its silence, and the snow continued to fall, covering the traces of blood and fire. Captain Franz Mayer, alone, wounded but victorious, moved deeper into the Ardennes, a living shadow of war, leaving a trail of devastation that would never be forgotten. Dawn broke over the Ardennes, gray and cold, painting the devastated American camp in pale light. Fires had died to embers, smoke curling lazily into the sky. Snow covered the torn ground, mixing with mud, blood, and debris from the night's carnage. The camp, which had been a symbol of American control just 24 hours earlier, was now a graveyard, silent, desolate, and almost unrecognizable. Captain Franz Mayer was gone. No one saw him leave. No trace of his passage remained except for the bodies of fallen men, scattered and lifeless across the snow. The survivors of the American assault, if any had managed to crawl away unseen, would find themselves haunted for the rest of their lives by a single thought. A shadow had moved among them, invisible, unstoppable, and lethal. As the first American reinforcements arrived later that morning, the horror became apparent. The camp was wrecked. Tents were burned, supply crates smashed, rifles broken, and snow stained red. Soldiers moved cautiously, checking for ambushes, shouting to one another, but the silence was deafening. Where had the enemy gone? Who had survived? And how had a single German officer managed to turn an overwhelming attack into a slaughter of Americans? Eyewitnesses, the few who had hidden in snowdrifts or behind debris, described flashes in the shadows, gunfire from invisible angles, and the sound of someone moving with inhuman speed and precision. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered of a German officer who had survived against impossible odds and killed every soldier who crossed his path. Others spoke in hushed tones of a phantom, moving among the trees, striking with lethal intent. Lieutenant Cross, who had survived only by diving into a frozen trench during the height of Mayer's assault, could scarcely speak. He had seen men cut down one by one, had felt the invisible presence of someone hunting them. He knew the truth. It was not a squad, not a group, it was one man. Captain Franz Mayer, alone, had turned a battlefield into his hunting ground. Mayer himself moved silently through the forest, careful to avoid patrols, careful to leave no trace. His body was exhausted, his uniform tattered and blood-stained, but his mind was sharp, his will unbroken. Every step was deliberate, every movement considered. He was a ghost now, a shadow among the trees, a master of survival and death. By mid-morning, reports began to reach higher command. American soldiers had been killed in a camp that should have been secure. Reconnaissance found bodies but no evidence of an organized German unit. Only Mayer remained, the lone predator, whose presence would haunt the Ardennes for days to come. Soldiers described him as methodical, precise, and terrifyingly patient. Some suggested that the entire assault might have been a trap, that Mayer had anticipated every American move. The legend of the German soldier who walked into an American camp and left no one alive began to spread. Mayer was never captured. He vanished into the forest, moving south, carrying the scars of battle but leaving behind a trail of fear. Commanders debated his identity, his methods, and the terrifying skill of a single man who had outmatched an entire attacking force. For the survivors, the memory lingered. The screams, the gunfire, the flashes in the snow, they would never forget them. Mayer's name became whispered, a shadowed reminder that war was unpredictable, that courage and discipline could be undone by a single, determined individual. And in the snow-covered Ardennes, as the sun climbed higher, Captain Franz Mayer walked on, alone, unseen, undefeated, a solitary figure who had survived an impossible attack, turned the tide against overwhelming odds, and vanished into the forests of Europe. His story would become legend, a chilling testament to the deadly precision and ruthlessness of one man in the chaos of World War II. The camp remained empty, silent, and frozen, a grim monument to a day when survival, skill, and fear met in the hands of a single predator. And somewhere in the Ardennes, Captain Mayer continued his march, leaving only shadows behind.